Hey, Dad. Um, I want to make this video as a reference for you for the conversation we're going to have about how to play your hands post flop. Okay? This is just going to be a summary. I will try to keep it as brief as I can. I feel like it's going to be about 20 or 30 minutes. Um, but I want to leave it here as a reference for you. So if it doesn't make immediate sense after we talk, you can come back and look at this and it has the broad strokes. Okay. Um, what I'm trying to show you here is when you get to the flop in a hand of Hold'em, you can usually categorize your hands into four buckets, okay, by hand strength. And here's what they are. On the right, you see the hand strength. The very strong hands that will be value betting, and these are hands that are so strong that we expect we can, on many runouts, we can bet the flop, turn, and river and get calls on all those streets and still be ahead. So that needs you need to have a very strong hand. And it's usually something like top pair, top kicker, or better. Um, Sometimes that's not even strong enough to bet all three streets. Okay. Um, but the objective with those hands is to get our opponents to put money in with us driving the action, and that takes a very strong hand. The next category is the decent hands, and those are hands like usually it's like top pair or second pair. It depends on the board, but it's the hands that don't fit into the top category but are just below it, and this category usually and all the way down to anything that has some showdown value. So this category kind of ranges from ace high up to top pair with an okay kicker. That's that's kind of the range. So that's a lot of hands. That's like most of the hands that you would think of as like, oh, this is worth something. And so how we navigate with those hands makes up a lot of our win rate. Being able to just get value and either by betting or by checking and getting our opponents to bet a worse hand. Um, and so that's why it's kind of called the bluff catching / pot control group. And the plan there is our initial plan is for us to get money to go in on one or two streets, but probably not all the streets. Okay. A really obvious example would be like if we raise and the flop comes king 10 3 with two diamonds, and we have a hand like king 9, top pair with an okay kicker. The opponent checks, we bet, they call. The turn is a deuce, it's nothing. They check. Now we still think we're ahead, but we check anyway. So it goes check, bet, call on the flop, then check, check on the turn, and then on the river they check again, and we make a value bet and get called by second pair that is wondering if we're bluffing. Or we bet the flop, they call, the turn goes check, check, and now they bet the river, and we call, and they have a bluff. Okay? Or they have us beat. But the point is, we got an appropriate amount of money to go in to the pot with our medium hand by not bloating it too much and blasting away on every street. Okay? Then the next category of hands are the ones that we want to bluff with. These are hands that don't have showdown value now, but have potential to make a very strong hand. So an example on the king 10 3 flop would be queen jack. Queen jack is only queen high. But if it makes a straight, it can beat a very strong range of hands. So we can bet with that hand, and it would be great for us if something better folds, like ace high. But even if ace high doesn't fold, or ace high will fold, but if our opponent doesn't fold, we know, oh, they have something stronger, and we still have a chance to win money by beating that hand later, or by bluffing it out later. Okay, and so that our plan with these hands are to bet at least once, but we may end up betting every single street as a bluff. Okay, and that's going to depend on the run out and our opponent, a lot of factors. Okay, and then the last category are the give ups. These are hands, so on King 10-3, 2 diamonds, this would be a hand like 8-7 of hearts or deuce-deuce. Okay, these hands are not very good and they don't have much potential, and you can't just blast away with everything all the time. And so our opponent checks and we don't even bluff. We just check. And the plan is, if our opponent bets the next street, we're just going to fold. But sometimes our opponent checks again, shows weakness, something in the board changes, gives us a little potential. We may decide we want to bluff later, or we may not even have to. We may, if it went check, check on the flop, and then an 8 came on the turn, giving us a pair of 8s, third pair, and our opponent checked again, we may move it into category 2, where we're bluff catching pot control. We either bet now, planning to check the river, or we check now, planning to bet the river, something like that. Okay, so the give up category starts as a give up. It could move to a different category by the end. Okay, now let's look at this example that we talked about, that I mentioned here. Let's say we raise from the button and only the big blind calls. Okay, so this isn't reflective of what you'll see at Potawatomi, but it's a simplified version of all the hands that you're going to play. Okay, so only the big blind calls. The flop is king of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, 3 of spades. King 10-3 with a flush draw. How should we play different parts of our range? Okay, so I didn't say what our hand is. We're going to talk about a few different hands we might have. You know what we raise from the button. King 8 offsuit or better. Any 2 cards, offsuit cards, 8 or better. Any pair, any 2 suited cards, 6 or better. And Queen X suited, King X suited, all those hands. Okay? Let's say we have a hand like pocket 8s. Okay? I don't know how this isn't the flop we're looking for with pocket 8s, but pocket 8s is currently more likely than not ahead of our opponent's range. Let me show you what their range looks like. Okay. This is the calling range, big blind versus button. Okay, it's very wide. It's 48% of hands. And you can see them in yellow. And the ones in the top left corner that are white and blue are the hands they don't have, because they would re-raise those hands. So when it goes raise, call, and then they check the flop, they rarely have pocket jacks, queens, kings, or aces, or ace-king. Occasionally they will have these hands, but this is just a summary. This is approximately what the range will look like. Okay, I left ace-king suited in there to show sometimes they'll just call with those hands or whatever. Okay, this range is 48% of hands, and it has a lot of junk in there, right? King 10-3, 2 diamonds is the flop. Pocket 8s is 56% to win against that range on King 10-3. Okay? Um, that's not pre-flop. That's on the king 10-3 flop with third pair. I don't know if that surprised you or not. We still have the best hand most of the time. Okay? Um, so should we bet? I would argue no. Okay? And here's why. If we bet, this range here is that we're 56% against is not the range that calls us. Let's say we bet like half pot, okay? I think it's reasonable to expect that against a bet, the hands that won't fold are pairs and draws. So the hands that will fold are no pair, no draw. So like 9-5 suited that isn't diamonds on king 10-3. You know, jack 8 offsuit. Those hands will fold. Jack 9 offsuit is a gut shot and it may not fold. Okay? So I painted this range over here. This is the range that's a pair or a draw. The boxes that are in green are shaded that way because they are only the diamond combos. So only the cards that are flush draws. Okay? Everything else is either a pair, a pocket pair, a flopped pair, or a straight draw, a gut shot, or an open ender. So that range is 30%. They had 48% of hands before we bet, and then when we bet, they fold all the crap, and that's about a third of their holdings. It brings them down to 30% of hands. Okay, so how is pocket eights doing against this range? That is what's left after we bet and they call. Pocket eights against this range is a 60-40 underdog. Okay? So what that tells you is you cannot value bet pocket eights on that board if that's their calling range. Okay? Pocket eights is not ahead of the range that calls. One bet. Okay? I looked at some weak hands that would be ahead, or some mediocre hands, and one I found of this is the calling range. So a hand that's ahead is 10-9 suited. That's a hand we could have. King 10-3 flop. We flop second pair with a bad kicker. It's still, even all the hands that call us a pair or a draw, we are still ahead 53%. Okay? So that's about the bottom of the range of hands that can bet one street. If pocket eights can't do it, it's right below second pair, and pocket tens, a weak second pair, can just barely be ahead. We know that's kind of the threshold. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean we should bet all the hands that are second pair or better. And the reason for that is a little bit complex, although I suspect you might know it. But what's clear is when we bet, our opponent's range goes from this 48% to this 30%. Then the turn card comes out, and if they check and we bet again, now they're probably going to fold a lot of the weak draws and weak pairs, and their range will get stronger. They might go from 30% down to 15%. Okay? And so now, if we tried to bet a 10 again, even on a complete brick, like let's say a deuce came off on the turn, king 10-3, deuce doesn't bring the flush draw, and we have 10-9, and they check to us, If we bet again, the range that continues is not going to be behind second pair with no kicker. So what that tells me is we can't plan to bet all 3 streets. We can't even probably bet 2 streets most of the time and be ahead with second pair, no kicker. And so that means our second pair hands belong in the second category, not in the top category. Okay? Like I said, a good example of a hand that would want to bluff would be a hand like Queen Jack or Jack 8 of diamonds. Okay? Those hands are not best now, and so if our opponent happens to have one of the weak hands in their range, we bet and they just fold. And we win the pot with a weak hand. But if they don't fold, we know, okay, their hand is a bit stronger than we thought it was initially. But that's okay, because if we improve, we will still beat most of the hands that they might have. Okay? And we bet for multiple reasons. We bluff for multiple reasons, but the most obvious reason, or maybe not the most obvious reason, but one of the most important reasons is the other hands that we bet with. If we only bet very strong hands, our opponent would have no reason to call with weaker hands. So they have no reason to call us and pay us off when we bet flop, turn, river, or sometimes even flop, if we didn't bluff. So we need to bluff, and since we need to bluff, we should think about what hands are best to bluff with. And the way it works is the hands that are best to bluff on the flop and turn are the semi-bluffs that have potential to improve to something strong. So the hands that can become something strong but aren't strong now make ideal bluffs on the flop and turn. On the river, though, the hands that make good bluffs are potential means nothing, because there's no more improvement that can happen. So now all we're concerned with is getting our opponents to fold as often as possible. And so we choose cards, we choose bluffs that we arrived at the river with that block some of the hands our opponents might call with, like the strongest hands, the ones we know they're going to not fold. And also hands that unblock cards they might fold. Okay, so that is a mouthful, but I want to look through these points that I made here. Okay, being ahead before we bet is very different than being ahead after they continue against our bet. Okay, that was what I showed you with those ranges getting smaller. Okay? And thus, the range that calls 3 times, flop, turn, and river, tends to be very strong. Okay? You know how it is when you face a bet on King 10-3 and you have any hand, any okay hand. Say you have King with a bad kicker. You're going to call, and then the turn doesn't change anything, and your opponent bets again. Now it's a bigger bet. Now you start to get worried that you might have the best hand. And so you might fold immediately, or you might call one more. Then on the river, some new possibilities present themselves. Maybe not, but your opponent goes all in. Now it's hard to call, and that's with like top pair. Okay, so each time we bet, and our opponent doesn't fold, their range gets stronger. So in order to take a hand that and bet it 3 times and be ahead that third time, the hand has to be very, very strong. And that's kind of where I said, like, it kind of starts with like top pair, top kicker, but usually it's even stronger hands. So like on the King 10-3, we'd be looking at like a set would be a clear hand that could bet flop, turn, and river a lot of the time. Okay. Okay. Bluffs on the flop and turn are semi-bluffs, which are weak hands with some potential to become very strong, like I said. But bluffs on the river are hands that can't win if we check, that also block the calling range and unblock the folding range. Okay? So for example, on this sample board that we're talking about, let's say we have Jack 9 of spades. Okay? That's a hand we raise from the button. The King 10-3 with 2 diamonds flop comes, and we have a reasonable bluff. Lots of better hands will fold. Lots of hands that are better than Jack high will fold if we bet. Okay? All the ace high hands that don't have a gut shot will probably fold. So we bet that hand, and our opponent calls. Then the turn is the 7 of clubs, which is a really interesting card because it gives us more equity. Now a queen or an 8 will give us a straight. Our opponent checks again, and if we just had a gut shot, we'd have a closer decision, but now we have a pretty strong candidate to bluff again. Okay? So we bluff again, bet bigger, and again, our opponent calls. Now we just have like a pot size bet left. There's like $100 in the pot, and we have 100 left. Okay? Now the river is the ace of hearts. So we miss our draw, and diamond flush draw also missed. Okay? Our opponent checks one more time. This is a great hand to bluff with on the river. Jack 9 of spades. Okay? And it has 2 things going for it. It blocks one really strong hand that our opponent could potentially have, which is Queen Jack for a straight. We know it's harder for him to have a straight when we have one of the jacks. Okay? It's also fairly believable that we have Queen Jack because it would be very reasonable to bet it as a bluff on the flop and turn. We block the Queen Jack straight for him that he can't have, or not that he can't have it, but it makes it harder for him to have. And we unblock something that he will now probably fold, and that is flush draws. We don't have any diamonds in our hand, so we can make him fold something like Queen 8 of diamonds that might have called us twice. 3-4 of diamonds that could have a pair and a flush draw. 7-8 of diamonds that could have a pair and a flush draw will now be hard pressed to call an all in. Even if he has like the ace 5 of diamonds that rivered a pair of aces, he will probably call us, but not for sure. It's not some easy call when your opponent has just bet, and you only have top pair with no kicker. Okay? But more likely than that, if he called flop and turn, is that he had a king. That's the most common hand an opponent would have in this spot. It'd be something like king jack, king queen, king nine, something like that. Now this ace is a death card for him, right? Because if we were bluffing with the ace high flush draw, we rivered a pair of aces. If we were bluffing with the open-ended straight draw, we rivered a straight. If we already had a strong hand, we could be betting it again. If we have like a set of tens or something, we could be betting. So that's sort of how this works. If we had jack nine of diamonds, this would not be as good of a bluff. And the reason is a bunch of the hands that we want him to fold contain the jack of diamonds or the nine of diamonds on the river. Okay? And so the fact that we have those cards means he can't have those air balls that we want him to have. Okay? That takes away a bunch of potential folds. And so that's what it means to unblock something. Okay? When we don't have any diamonds, we unblock missed diamonds. Okay? Okay. There are definitely counterpoints to all the things that I said. I'm sure you've thought of some of them. And all I can say is that when we're bluffing, I can imagine you might be thinking like, well, aren't we going to run into the ace of diamonds a lot? Like, aren't we going to, the guy rivered a pair or whatever? And the answer is we are going to run into it sometimes. But when we are deciding to bluff, the process is like, we're going to bluff with something. Because if we're never going to bluff with anything, then in theory, we should never get paid off when we bet. Okay? So against most reasonable opponents, we always are going to have some bluffs. And the question is just, what are the best bluffs? What are the ones that are most efficient where they won't win if we check and they have a good chance of working because of the blocker properties that they have and potentially the story that we're trying to tell. And so that's kind of how that works. Okay, that's how the bluff would go. A give up would be something like pocket deuces. Say we raise the button, the big blind calls, we have pocket deuces, the flop is king 10-3 with the flush draw. They check. We're slightly likely, we're not likely to have the best hand right now. It's pretty close. It's like a toss-up. And we have very little chance to improve. And we'll have a hard time knowing if we have the best hand. It's a good spot to just give up. We don't have two potential outs, or even one if the deuce of diamonds doesn't help us, is not enough. You usually need at least four potential outs to think of a hand as a decent bluffing candidate. Okay? So 2 outs, not going to do it. We just check. Okay? Or like a hand like 6-5 of clubs, on the king 10-3. But let's say we check. I'm just giving up. I have 6-5 of clubs. Okay? And now the turn is the 4 of hearts. So now the board is king 10-3, 4. And we have 6-5 of clubs. Well, now we turned an open-ender. If our opponent checks again, we can definitely consider making a bet. The bet is good because we have 6 high. So anything that folds is going to be making a better hand. We made a better hand fold. Furthermore, we can handle it if we strengthen the range by putting a bet in and they call. And so, because if we hit our straight, we're still going to be able to beat almost everything they have. So sometimes a hand can go from the give up category into the bluffing category. Sometimes it can even go, we might have been giving up with, we might have had like queen 6 suited, from the button on king 10-3, and we're just giving up, but then the turn is a queen. Now, suddenly, our hand's upgraded to the category 2, where we might have enough to catch a bluff. If our opponent bets the turn when we turn a queen, I wouldn't fold. I would call. I might fold the river if they bet again, or I might not. It's kind of borderline. So anyway, you can that's enough. That's 30 minutes, and hopefully you have an idea of what each category is. And every hand that you're in, you kind of want to do this. You want to think about, what kind of hand do I have here? Is it a really strong hand that wants to just start piling money in? Because even though my opponent's range gets stronger every time I make them put money in, my hand is still going to be good after 3 of those? Or is it, my hand's pretty good and I think I have the best hand now, but I can't count on them putting in money 3 times with worse. So therefore, I need to check one street, get them to bluff, get them to be suspicious because I checked, and then I can make a value bet on the river. And they would go, well, why didn't you bet the turn if you have so much? Oh, I'm going to call you with 3rd pair, or whatever. Okay? Or is my hand have no showdown value now, but is something I can bluff with? And that's, generally, when you flop a draw, you think, I want to mostly bluff with this draw. But it's important to balance it and not always bet or raise when you have a draw. Sometimes you check back, sometimes you check call. Those are important things, and it basically, what you want to do is, you don't want your opponent to be able to rule out certain kinds of hands. Well, he can't have a straight draw. It came king 10-3, and then the turn was a 9, and now he's betting. Well, he can never have a straight because he would always bet queen jack. Always. If you always bet the draws when you have them, then when you don't have that, when you don't bet, you're telling your opponent, I can never have this hand. And so they're not going to believe you if you're trying to represent it later, and they're not going to be afraid to value bet and raise you when they know, well, you can never have this hand or whatever. Okay? And then there's the give ups. And you shouldn't have tons of give ups, because there's a lot of ways to potentially bluff. And we haven't even gotten into, there are some boards that are so good for you, for your range versus the opponent's range, that you should be willing to bluff with almost anything when they check to you. But that's a little bit of an advanced topic. For now, you want to try to categorize your hands into one of these 4. And I'm just going to scroll through this sheet so that you can see it again. And then if there's anything you have a question about, you can pause it. I look forward to talking with you about this stuff. And hopefully I can make it as clear as possible so you can get out there and make some money. Okay.